Let's talk about the Mahle M40 drive unit. At least for me personally, it's one of the most exciting new drive systems that have been introduced this year because it's compact, it's powerful, and it has some really nice features. So obviously we took it to our test bench and I took the bike for quite a few rides to see if it lives up to at least my expectations and if it is able to match the numbers and the performance of the likes of DJI or Bosch. So let's dig in. Just a quick note before we dive straight into the video. We've tested the system the first time during summer, but after our initial testing, Mahle implemented some bug fixes and we did a whole retest this November. This is the reason why sometimes in this video you're gonna see a little bit of change in scenery. Sorry about that, but let's start. As one of the biggest automotive manufacturers in Germany, Mahle isn't new to the e-bike market. On the contrary, they have quite a bit of experience. On the one hand, with their hub motors like the X20 or the X35, they've been mostly used in gravel bikes or e-gravel bikes, e-road bikes and the likes, but also with mid-drive systems because, like some of you might know, they've been producing and developing the light motors for Specialized. So the Specialized SL 1.2 or 1.1, they've been made and developed by Mahle in the past. So they had quite a bit of experience when they started developing this drive system in the bike behind me. It's called M40 and they've took a lot of the learnings they've made with their older drive systems and also carried over quite a few things from what the other drive systems can do really well. Let's talk about the motor first, because this is probably where it's most exciting, because we have a really tiny small package, as you can see, 2.5 kilograms in weight, but it's supposed to deliver 105 Newton meters of torque and 850 watts of max power. So it almost matches the power numbers of DJI and it exceeds what, for example, the Bosch CX Gen 5 offers, while being lighter than both of them. Yeah, granted, the Avinox system is only like 20 grams heavier, at least manufacturer numbers, but still, it's a really compact, really lightweight system, and it's supposed to be pretty powerful. And that's something that makes it really exciting. Also, the form factor of the drive unit itself is very beneficial for the manufacturers of the bikes, because it's a really narrow drive unit here in the back where the crank is attached, which means that bike manufacturers have a lot of room to develop their frames, because this is something that a lot of those newer e-mountain bikes struggle with, or at least the developers struggle with, that they have to fit the motor in here, which sometimes makes it hard to include some special suspension designs, for example, like you've seen, for example, with Santa Cruz, who moved away from VPP because they couldn't fit it in the frame. And this could be a lot easier with drive units like the Mahle M40. So this is pretty exciting. On the technical side, we have a 48 volt system. So it's supposed to be pretty efficient, also thermally, because, well, it has to, given the big claims when it comes to power and the lightweight and compact form factor. So yeah, I'd say let's dive right in. Let's look at the numbers. And before we start, a big thanks to Mahle, especially to Pablo and Alberto, who went with us to the test bench at PT Labs, not to tell us what to test, but to give us some insights of what the things mean that we've measured and what the reasons for some of those things are, and I'll share them with you where it's useful. So first of all, let's look at the power numbers. Usually I say we start with the max power output, but the way we measure it, it doesn't really give the max power output for the Mahle M40. What do I mean with that? Well, our usual numbers are 250 watts of input power at the crank, max power or max assist level of the system, and a cadence of about 75. This is where most drive units deliver their max power. However, For the Mahle M40, you need a higher cadence around 90 to 95 to get the most of this out of the system. Still, we look at our measurements at 75 RPM so we can compare better to all the other drive systems. And also, with not even going like full on power, we're looking at the third most powerful system we've had in our test ever. It's a tiny bit more powerful than the Sachs RS or the Gubao P100, and it comes close to the DJI Avinox with its 850 watts firmware. I have to add that. And the TQ HPR 120. It's not huge, the gap. So we have a pretty powerful system here. And when we look at the power output at just 100 watts of rider input power, we see a pretty big gap between those two rider input numbers, which means we have a system that rewards you for pedaling harder. It doesn't give away all of its power at low rider input. That means it might feel a bit more natural, and it still feels like a bike. And this is something that Mahle said was pretty important during the development process. But yeah, I've said the system can do more power, and obviously we tested that. So we did like 95 RPM, I think, and 250 watts of input power on the cranks. And then we almost matched their claimed numbers. We were at around 800 watts of raw output power of the drive system, which is pretty insane for such a tiny package. But yeah, I've already touched on how they've tuned the support level. So you need some rider input to get the power from the system. And we can definitely see that when we look at the graph of the power output, where we look at the power output in relation to the rider input power. We've tested this first to compare in the highest support level, which is called L3. And the Mahle is pretty similar to the specialized S3.1 motor, just a little bit more powerful. But the tuning of the support level is pretty close to that. It's more powerful than the Bosch CX. It delivers more power at lower rider input, but it's not as, let's say, jerky and unnatural as, for example, the Gubao. Not that it's a bad thing per se, but the Gubao, for example, delivers a lot of power at really low rider input. The same goes for the DJI Avinox system. So they tend to feel less natural. And this is somewhere in between, still delivering lots of power, but also asking you to pedal a bit, to use it like a bike. And we can see the same thing when we look at all the other support levels. There's 3, and they're pretty pragmatic when it comes to naming. They're called L1, L2, and L3. And we've measured all of them. So when we take a look at those, we can see that they're tuned quite differently. Especially L2 is a pretty rewarding support level. I'll touch on that a little bit more in depth later when we talk about the performance on the trail. But it asks you to pedal quite hard, but if you do, you get a pretty powerful system. So there's almost no power ceiling. So if you put in 300 watts, 350 watts, you still get a little bit more power each time, which is fun to ride. And when we look at the lower support level, L1, we can see that it's pretty tame. It's less powerful than, for example, the Bosch CX in its eco mode. So you have to pedal quite hard to get a little bit of power out of the system. On the other hand, the power consumption is pretty low for that. But now that we've gone so much into detail when it comes to support levels, there's one important thing I have to mention. The whole tuning of the whole system. This is probably not much more than a suggestion by Mahle, because they aim to work really closely to the bike manufacturers who will use the system in the future. So all of those support levels and a lot of the other parameters and things with the drive system, I'll talk about all of that a little bit later, they can be tuned specifically for the bike and for the manufacturer, depending on how it's supposed to be ridden, what the kind of rider looks like, who the manufacturer thinks will use the bikes. So take this with a grain of salt. I don't think that a lot of those manufacturers will like tune it vastly differently, but we might see slight differences between the bikes when they will hit the market in the next 1, 2, or 3 years. Something we can also see looking at this graph is that all the support levels are linear. There's no real progressive support level, which is a bit of a shame. I was surprised when I rode the bike because we did the test bench test before I got to ride it, and I expected it to feel linear, but especially L2 didn't really feel like that for me. I'm talking a bit about the riding experience now, but we'll go more into depth with that later. But it didn't really feel that way. Maybe because it's such a slow slope where the drive system power output rises slowly with the rider input. I don't know what it is, but it felt more dynamic and more natural than I expected it to. Just to add that. And now let's move on to the cadence graph, where we look at the power output in relation to rider cadence. We do this measurement not at maximum power, so not at 250 watts, but at 130 watts, because we want it to be a little bit more closer to how the bikes will be ridden most of the time. And we don't want to hit, a power ceiling where we reach max power, and with higher cadence we could theoretically get more out of the system. And looking at this looks pretty amazing because we have a very solid power output at really low cadences like 40, 50, 60. Looks already pretty good. And then hitting cadence of 70, it flats out and nothing happens. There's almost no fluctuation in output power in relation to cadence. And I'm aware that the graph ends at a cadence of 120, but I can add that it's pretty solid until 130, where it slowly starts to drop off. And then at 135, 140, the system shuts off completely, which is true for almost all systems except the Bosch. Bosch probably doesn't care. I think it goes on until 150 and still delivers power for whoever needs that. But the Mahle is very good, very solid until 130. So I don't think it's going to be an issue, not even for the most sportive riders out there. And the way it works with like this really steady power output is that it's a really easy and intuitive system to ride. And yeah, as we've seen, we have a pretty powerful motor, and it's lightweight and it's pretty compact. And usually, it's physics. If you output a lot of power and you don't have a lot of, thermal mass, it's gonna be difficult to manage thermals. And that's what we're gonna talk about. And I was pretty excited and maybe a little bit doubtful when we started this test. And first of all, I can tell you the Mahle is really, really impressive when it comes to that, especially taking in its form factor and its weight. Let's look at our 15 minutes window, which is 15 minutes of full power of the drive system. And as you can see, it's flawless. During those 15 minutes, there is a little bit of power loss, but this might come down to, the dropping voltage in the battery. I don't think it's related to thermals, because that usually looks a little bit different. And we lose less than 5% of power in 15 minutes, which is up there with the best. However, usually drive units start to struggle between 15 and 20 minutes. And let's look at those extended numbers, which is, a niche use case. It might not happen to you every day, but if you're maybe a little bit of a heavier rider and you're riding during summer and you have, long climbs, it might happen that you get into these areas. And as we can see, it's surprising how long the Mahle M40 lasts with like this power output. Only after 16, 17 minutes we see a drop off in power. However, this is really smooth. It looks similar than what Bosch does, but the Bosch CX Gen 5 throttles a lot earlier. But the approach to it is similar. It's really smooth in a way that you might not even notice when riding. It feels a lot better than a sharp drop off like we see on the Specialized motor. where you can really feel it while riding. You probably won't do that here. And it's also not a lot of power that you're losing. It's like 15 to maybe 20% worst case, which is really good. And we can also see that when you look at the numbers, like the benchmarks, our average power and our minimum power. The Mahle M40 is up there with the best. The only one that's better is the Gobao P100, but you have to take into account it's a much bigger and heavier motor. So when it comes to like thermal management, it's an impressive job that Mahle has managed to do with the M40. And now to our last measurement from the test bench, which is cutoff behavior. And I'm aware that it's not the same for all the regions in the world. At least here in Europe or in Germany, we have like the 25 kilometers an hour speed limit, and there's some leeway, so it can go a little bit faster. I think it's around 27 k's where it really has to shut off. And Mahle uses all the room it has until the system starts to reduce its power. So where you can see in the graph that it's a very smooth way to handle this. It's very similar to the DJI Avinox. But it goes on a little bit longer. So it cuts off in the graph a little bit early, but I can tell you it goes on until a little bit above 27 kilometers an hour where the system completely shuts off. However, this is also something that the manufacturer of the bike can tune themselves in the future. Obviously, there's going to be an app for the drive system. Mahle has a lot of experience when it comes to this because they have a really nicely designed, pretty cool app for their hub motors. And we're going to see something similar for the M40. As of yet, it's not finished, so I couldn't take a look at it. I only saw the beta version on one of the Mahle guys when we took a closer look at it. But what I can tell you right now, you're going to be able to customize all the different assist levels and also lots of the, you can tune the overrun in a way you like. You can turn on or off the hill brake feature that we're going to talk a little bit more about later in the video. However, you won't need the app to customize the different motor mappings or assist levels. You can do this on the bike if you want to. And I could already take a look at it, but keep in mind, Mahle told me this is not yet 100% finished, like the menu you're seeing in the video right now. So this might change it a little bit. Not necessarily what you can change, but the naming and so on. This is not 100% final. But as you can see, you can tune the power, you can tune the response time, you can tune the acceleration of the system. And it's like the approach is a little bit different than what we see from other manufacturers because all the values are always at 100. This means it's 100% of the standard setting. And you can push them up to 150. So you can tweak and do that a little bit. And it's nice to see that you can do this on the bike itself. Sure, most of the time it's more convenient and a little bit more intuitive to do it in the app. But not everyone likes to always have the smartphone at hand or use apps at all. You don't have to do that with the Mahle M40. You can get, all of the features, all of the customization on the bike itself, which is nice. Let's move on to the topic of battery and charging. For the start, there are going to be two batteries available with the Mahle M40 system, an IM5 battery and a IM8 battery. IM5 has a capacity of 534 watt hours. It's the smaller of the two. And there's going to be a larger IM8 battery with 800 watt hours. This is the one we had in our test bike. When it comes to form factor, they're pretty similar. So the diameter is identical. So both batteries can be used in the same down tube. They just differ in length. This has the advantage, like I said, that a bike manufacturer can use it as a modular battery system, so you can easily fit both those batteries in the same down tube. The downside of this approach is that they're both pretty chunky in diameter, especially for the smaller IM5 battery, which just taking in the number of cells in there, could be a much, thinner battery for a more elegant frame design. But you're giving that up for, the modularity of the system. This is a compromise that every drive manufacturer has to make at some point. I understand why Mahle did this. I think it's the right thing to do in the beginning. But maybe we're gonna see a little bit of a, different, more elegant form factor in the future. What's pretty impressive is the weight and the energy density of the two batteries. The smaller one, the IM5, is claimed to have 2.5 kilos, and the bigger one is claimed to have 3.8 kilos, which puts both of them almost at the top of our energy density chart. Only the DJI Avinox 800 is a tiny bit better, but it's really only a few grams. And also something you might be interested in, for now, all the bike designs integrate the battery in the frame, so there's no removable option for the batteries yet. And when talking about batteries, obviously we have to talk about charging as well. And when it comes to that, I have good news and I have bad news. And let's start with the bad news first. There's not going to be a fast charger for the system, at least right now. The standard charger that comes with it is only 4 amps. It's the same as, for example, a Bosch charger. However, this is a 48 volt system. The charger has a charging voltage of 54 volts. So we have a much higher charging power. It's above 200 watts, so quite a bit more power than the Bosch charger, which translates in shorter charging times. I would love to give you, real numbers, how long it's taking to charge the batteries. However, the BMS, so the battery management system of our bike or our battery in there, is not final yet. So the whole, mapping of the percentage that's displayed doesn't really match the real charging. So I couldn't really do, real charging tests. However, if we look at the numbers, it's gonna be around 200 watts of charging power. And when we take that into account, I'll just display you the charging times. They're okay. Also for the bigger battery, they're not top of the charts. They're not on a level of the Avinox system or the specialized with the smart charger, but they're fine. It's okay. It's not gonna take you all night or all day to charge the battery from 0 to 100%. I've asked Mahle about two things that the system doesn't offer yet, and that's first a range extender and secondly, of course, a fast charger. And I got the same answer for both. They said it's on their roadmap. They don't want to make any commitments if it's going to be available or when. So that's all I can tell you for now. We'll have to wait and see and hope for the best. All right, moving on to displays and remote, which is going to be pretty short because there's only one display. I think it's called Head Unit Plus. It's a display, color display in the top tube. It's integrated. It's not as nice as, for example, the Avinox display TQ or the Bosch display. They're integrated a little bit more neatly, and the display itself looks a little bit more modern than this does. It's fine. It's bright enough. It's not old school, but the others are a little bit better, at least from my taste. When it comes to remotes, I like them pretty much. We have two, the Duo, and there's also a Trio remote. The Duo remote, as the name suggests, has 2 buttons just to switch support levels. Pretty simple. It's ergonomic. It's minimalistic. It's just nice. It's what I want from a simple remote on a sportive e-mountain bike. The Trio remote has one big advantage. It's wireless, because the Duo remote still has a wire attached to it. The Trio remote is wireless and has a third button where you can swipe through the screens. So yeah, I think the Trio will be paired mostly with the new Mahle M40. And now let's move on to the performance on the trail. How does the Mahle M40 feel? I was pretty excited to ride the system, and I was even more excited after the first probably 30 minutes while riding it. Because to me personally, when it comes to the riding feel, it strikes a perfect balance between the punchiness of a drive system like the DJI Avinox or also the older Sax RS. Some of you might know this system, right? With a lot of punch when you start pedaling, but also offers consistency and a natural riding feel as soon as you get into riding. Like, it strikes a perfect balance and feels amazing. The tuning of the different assist levels I enjoyed. I touched on this before when I talked about the progressiveness or the lack of a progressive assist level. I didn't mind it as much as I thought I would. I was riding mostly in L2, which felt pretty rewarding, which was fun to ride. Still, I would love to have a real progressive assist level, but it's fine the way it is. And as soon as you head into the trail and go uphill a little bit more in technical terrain, the modulation felt amazing. Like, it's a really, really nicely tuned system. Probably also comes down to the hall sensor in the back, or there's, I think, 2 hall sensors even. So you have 84 points where the system measures what the rear wheel does. And I don't know if it's because of that, because other systems achieve a similar feeling with just 1 point. But still, it feels good. Like, the modulation is there also when it's slippery, also when it's steep. Starting after stopping on the trail is good. I really like the power output in L2 and also in L3. It didn't feel as brutal as I thought it would, and I used it quite a bit on the trail going uphill. And I usually don't use the higher support levels because they're usually a little bit too much for my skills and the trails I ride. But I've enjoyed it, and it also, I missed my lines quite a few times, and it saved my ass quite a few times because it just kept on going. And something that also helped me a lot in those situations was the overrun that comes with the system. And curiously, this is the biggest difference that I felt when out on the trail between the software we had during summer and now in winter, because the overrun at first was pretty tame and very, natural. There wasn't really a lot of kick, a lot of, boost, but this changed completely with the newest software, and it's close to what Bosch does with the extended boost. It's not as punchy and not as aggressive, but the approach is very similar. So that means in numbers, for the maximum overrun, we get 2 meters, like the legal limit, and that's a lot. Like, if you don't know it, 2 meters of overrun is a lot. However, you can dynamically decide how long the overrun is gonna be for you, depending on the ride situation. You're doing this via your cranks, how much power you put on your cranks when you stop pedaling. Mahle told me that the length of the overrun is determined by the last turn of the cranks before you stop pedaling. So that means if you go up a steep hill and you put a lot of power in your cranks and you just stop, like you stay on your pedals, you're in pedaling and you stop pedaling with a lot of force, it's gonna push you a lot. However, if you just want a little bit, you just slow down your pedaling movement and it's gonna be a lot more tame, a lot more controllable. And if you don't want any overrun at all, just slow down like your pedals before stopping and there's not gonna be any overrun at all. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. It's similar to what Bosch does. It feels a tiny bit different, but it's very intuitive. I liked it a lot. It helped me in those technical situations. And it's also, I think, besides Bosch, the only system where you can get a kick from still stand. So if you just are on still stand and you need to get up a bigger step, for example, if your technical skills allow you to do that, You can do that with the Mahle, like this initial push that just needs a little bit of power on the cranks to push you up things. This is possible here. It's also not as punchy with the Bosch. You need a little bit of turn of the cranks to activate it. Whereas with the Bosch, you can really, push it for just a little bit of input and it goes. You need like maybe 10 degrees of a crank turn to activate this overrun, but it's nice that you can do that. A very cool technical feature is that the drive system detects the gear that you're in automatically, also with mechanical shifting. And I think it's the only system besides the Avinox that can do that. I don't know how this works exactly. I am pretty sure the system has to know what size of chainring you run, what cassette you run, but it calculates like the gear you're in dynamically, depending on your crank, your input torque, your cadence. I have no idea how this works exactly, but it works. And Mahle told me there's a lot of possibilities you can do with that data that the drive system knows which gear you're in. Right now, one of the things that they do, for example, is that they adjust the torque of the system, the output torque, depending on the gear you're in. So the full 105 Newton meters of torque you only get in the lower gears where you need that kind of torque. In the lighter gears, you don't have that because a lot of torque in those situations, it's gonna result in your rear wheel slipping. So this is kind of cool, and I'm excited to see what they're gonna do with that data in the future. And there's also a second pretty cool feature, which is called hill stop. And it's difficult to describe. It almost works like a handbrake on your car when you start on a really steep hill. Because those of you who go up like technical uphill sections every once in a while, you know that at some point you will put your foot down, at least one of them. And you have to get your fingers on the brake like immediately when it's really steep, because the bike will fall back down if you don't. And you don't have to do this with the Mahle M40, because if you put one foot down and you keep your other foot on the pedal and put just a tiny bit of pressure on there, you don't have to stand on it, just keep your foot on there, the system will lock up. It detects the gradient, so if it knows you are in an uphill section and you put your foot down really lightly, the system locks and the bike doesn't go down. And you can chill, you can keep your one foot on the ground, and if you decide to go on, all you have to do is put your second foot back on the pedal and go on pedaling. No brakes involved. It takes a little bit of time to get used to it. It has a learning curve, but I've used it more than I thought I would. At first I thought it was a marketing gimmick, this function, but I was surprised how much or how many times I used it. So pretty cool, pretty neat feature. Next up, let's talk about sound and noise. So there's two scenarios where like motor sound or noise is important. That's when going uphill and when going downhill. Let's focus on the uphill first. It's not a noisy motor, but it's definitely an audible motor. You will hear it. You will hear it over the gravel under your tires. It's not as quiet as the Specialized 3.1. It's not as quiet as the Bosch CX Gen 5. And it's not as quiet as the DJI Avinox. I think it's a little bit more quiet than the older generation drive units like Bosch CX Gen 4 or Shimano EP801. I'd put it somewhere in the middle. It's definitely, you can definitely hear it. Let's keep it at that. And you can hear it, I'll just put in some videos so you can be the judge yourself. Talking about the sound or the noise of the system on the trail is gonna be a tough one now. Because it's hard for me to judge, because both of the bikes we've had to test, like the one in summer and also now this one, they're not the quietest bikes out there. But I know that there is some cable rattle. I can, reproduce it by rattling on the cables. There is some play in the pivots somewhere, and all in all, the whole bike is not very quiet. Like, there is some rattle. I can't 100% tell you if the motor is rattle-free. I am pretty positive that it is, because this rattle test that you can usually do where you do those small movements on the crank, and if you do that on a Bosch CX Gen 4 or Shimano EP801, you can hear some rattle, like really bad rattle, and it's dead quiet when you do that. But I'm not confident to tell you 100% that this motor is not gonna have any rattle at all, just because I couldn't tell from the bike itself. I'm hopeful, but we have to wait and see when there are more bikes out there, more drive units, because from what we've learned in the past, it can vary from drive unit to drive unit to drive unit. And also maybe there is going to be some rattle after, 200, 300, 400 kilometers. So let's wait and see, but I'm pretty hopeful that this is a quiet system. So yeah, I think that's it. I've told you everything I know, we've learned about the Mahle M40 system, and I can say it managed to live up to my very high expectations. It's probably, I don't know, I'm not 100% confident to say it's my favorite drive system out there right now, but it's certainly up there. It's a strong contender. And before closing off the video, there's one topic we need to talk about, which is pretty important. Where can you buy them? Because the drive system, wow, it can be great, but if there's no bikes out there, yeah, it's not going to be of any use for you. Again, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is there are bikes out there that you can buy. The bad news is it's not a lot of them, and it's mostly very small niche manufacturers. A lot of them from France, from Spain. There are some wild bikes out there. The A-Bums bike from Spain, like a steel full suspension bike with the system, wild one. You really have to take a look at that. But it's gonna be hard for now to find a bike with this system. However, there is some hope. There is a silver lining, and this is this frame behind me, this bike and this frame. This was developed by Mahle themselves. In their team, there is someone that used to work for a bike manufacturer and has experience in frame design and development. And they designed this frame themselves as a show bike for the drive system. During this process, they decided it's a shame. It's a really good bike, and it's a shame if only we use this bike. So other manufacturers can use this frame design for their bikes. And we can already see that. If you look at the Mahle website right now, you can already scroll through some bikes with the M40 system, and you can see one or two manufacturers already that use this frame design, which is promising. It's an all-mountain enduro design with mullet wheels, 160, 150 millimeters of travel, really modern, progressive geometry. It's a solid bike. So I'm hopeful that we are gonna see this bike with different names out there in the future, so you can buy it and you can ride the system, because I'm excited for you too. Because it would be a shame if such a great drive system won't be available to a broader public. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this is gonna change. And yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about the Mahle M40. I'm excited to see where the system is heading, and leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you like what we do, and then I'll catch you next time. Bye bye.